discuss the issues that we want to talk about. The two big issues that have come up are, do we want to issue a temporary moratorium for now to buy us some time to work through enforcement issues and enforcement methodologies that have been recommended by the mayor's consultant. And finally, to talk about if, as has been suggested by some neighborhood groups, we would want to talk about a phase out of non-owner occupied types of permits. That would be type 2 and or type 3 over a longer period of time. That's sort of the grand scheme of the agenda that I would like to put forth.
If this body's goal were to phase out type 2 and type 3 as a use, or what are the pros and cons between, kind of picking up on what Councilman Withers said, if that's the goal or the intent, and it is mine.
I think we're using the word moratorium for a couple of different definitions. I'm trying to find out, Mr. Jameson or Mr. Cooper, is there a way in 492, without us having to re-refer it back to the Planning Commission, that we could do a suspension of issuing any new type 2 or type 3 permits? And if we can't, that's fine. But before we go to the moratorium question, I wanted just to find out, and before we left 492, if we were able to do anything of that nature with 492.
I don't think you can. In
particular, I'm getting the sense that both the general public of Nashville and the members of this body have the appetite to severely restrict types 2 and 3 in the city.
I have, thank you, Chair. I have asked this question before and always been told that it's not possible. But anyway, I'll give it another try. Can we ask, the bigger problem seems to be how some of these properties are impacting their neighbors and the immediate community. Can we make it to where when people need to renew an application that they have to get the signature from the immediate neighbors?
So the first thing I'd like to do is I would like to move that we add in, or that we have in this bill, that no new permits be issued for type 2s or 3s going forward for whatever we feel like is a comfortable amount of time. That while we're wrestling through this, maybe we do it for a 6-month, a 12-month, or whatever period of time. But I think that's critical, that we go ahead and we say, okay, we know we have a problem. Let's go ahead and stop issuing permits right now until we solve the rest of the problem.
I may have not explained before. I didn't want a notification. I wanted for the neighbors to sign off on the application.
An approval process.
Yeah, no, but not to be notified, but that they actually are required to sign off on the application or the permit is not issued.
Are following the rules and are good hosts. I can also tell you as the council member that virtually every email that I get from a host generally says, I'm a great host, my neighbors love it, and it's improved the neighborhood. And then I hear from the neighbors something different from that. And I've also had challenges, even for folks who live in the community sometimes, and this does not apply to all of them, but I've had the experience of having people live in the district, and I call them up on the phone and say, you know, I'm having this really, in some cases, minor issue. Can you address that issue, which would make your neighbors feel much better? And they don't. And most of those factors that make life difficult for the neighbors, about type 2s and 3s in particular, are not things that are illegal and are not necessarily things that are going to be assuaged by enforcement. It's improper use in the neighborhoods for the larger groups in particular in those houses.
If you have a Airbnb or a short-term rental property capable of hosting more than 4 people, we should make it mandatory that someone live there. So anything over 4 people, basically 2 bedrooms, you have to become a bed and breakfast, flat out. You're going to be taxed commercially, and you can't build those in residential areas already. Am I correct? Yeah, exactly.
The definition of family in the zoning code provides that you cannot have more than 3 unrelated people living there in the facility. So I think the short-term rental regulations would need to be amended if there were going to be a further limitation on the number. I think that has been discussed, and other legislation has been filed to address that issue.
Thank you.
I mean, there's just not a lot of violations being recorded, and nor are there a lot of people going out there and doing that. Put a moratorium on this, but nobody's going to enforce it, then what does that mean? I mean, if we get that, I'm not sure whether a moratorium even works, because if you're not enforcing the basic regulations now, and then you put more regulations on, and there's still no enforcement, then we're passing ordinances that nobody's going to follow up on.
Understanding the issues involving higher density Airbnbs, but what about where there's such a lower density? What about the areas, penalizing people that, like in my area, I have a lot of not necessarily residential, but agricultural. I have R40, R80, R2A, R5A. What happens to them? Ones where there's a house sitting in the middle of a field, and they're utilizing that as a Airbnb legally, and they're not creating any issues. So I'd just like that to be taken into consideration.
All we need is an economic change. The best advice I would give my constituents who have 2 or 3s who are doing it the right way is think about what your exit strategy is going to be, because we're going to continue arguing about this until we get to a point of banning it. It's kind of my feeling. And so I feel like there is a small group of folks who are owners of 2s and 3s, who are local, and I love them dearly, and I want to help them as much as I can. They are in the minority.
I'm a little concerned about the moratorium approach. We effectively have a moratorium within a certain radius of downtown because there are no more available permits. We do have an obvious enforcement problem. I think we've got some pretty solid recommendations from the consultant that we should follow through regardless of what the legislative approach is. But I will say, I think it is time for Nashville to rip off the Band-Aid. I think it is time for our residentially zoned areas to be full of residences. And that is where we go to aggressively on the phase out for type 2 and type 3 with some specific restrictions.